everyone. We are going to read Chapter 5 of Lion Witch in the Wardrobe. Before we do that, let's go over some words that we're going to see in this chapter. Okay, we have the word savagely, which means angrily. Coolly means calmly, without any concern. Logic is thinking things through and understanding things, giving good reasoning. It's what makes sense. Spectacles are eyeglasses. Inclined means to be interested or likely. Okay, if you're inclined to go to the movies, you're likely to go to the movies or you're interested in it. Trippers are tourists. Okay, and some expressions that will be in this chapter. We have taken aback, which means surprised. Queer in the head means going crazy. At their disposal is available to talk to. Taking a party over the house means showing tourists around. And sharp's the word means let's get away quickly. All right, so I will leave these up. Ooh, chapter 5, you ready? Here we are. This chapter is called Back on This Side of the Door. So if you remember when we left off in chapter 4, Edmund had found his way into the closet when he, to the wardrobe, I should say, when he followed Lucy. And he ended up meeting the Queen of Narnia. He was eating Turkish delights. And Lucy was so excited because she thought, she thought, great, now Edmund can tell everybody that I wasn't lying. He's here. He's seen it. It's going to be great. And then maybe the 4 of them could get into the closet, the wardrobe. All right, back on this side of the door. Because of the game of hide and seek still going on, it took Edmund and Lucy some time to find the others. But when at last they were all together, which happened in the long room where the suit of armor was, Lucy bursts out, "Peter, Susan, it's all true. Edmund has seen it too. There is a country you can get to through the wardrobe. Edmund and I both got in. We met one another in there, in the wood. Go on, Edmund, tell them all about it." "What's all this about, Ed?" said Peter. And now we come to one of the nastiest things in this story. Up to that moment, Edmund had been feeling sick and sulky and annoyed with Lucy for being right. But he hadn't made up his mind what to do. When Peter suddenly asked him the question, he decided all at once to do the meanest and most spiteful thing he could think of. He decided to let Lucy down. "Tell us, Ed," said Susan. And Edmund gave a very superior look, as if he were far older than Lucy, when there was really only a year's difference. And then a little snigger like, and he said, "Oh yes, Lucy and I have been playing, pretending that all her story about a country in the wardrobe is true. Well, just for fun, of course. There's nothing there, really." Poor Lucy gave Edmund one look and rushed out of the room. Edmund, who was becoming a nastier person every minute, thought that he had scored a great success, and he went on at once to say, "There she goes again. What's the matter with her? That's the worst of young kids. They always—" "Look here," said Peter, turning on him savagely. "Shut up. You've been perfectly beastly to Lou ever since she started this nonsense about the wardrobe, and now you go playing games with her about it and setting her off again. I believe you did it simply out of spite." "But it's all nonsense," said Edmund, very taken aback, right? Very surprised that Peter was talking to him this way. "Of course it's all nonsense," said Peter. "That's just the point. Lou was perfectly all right when we left home. But since we've been down here, she seems to either be going queer in the head, going crazy, or she's turning into a most frightful liar. But whichever it is, what good do you think it'll do by jeering and nagging her one day and encouraging her the next?" I thought, said Edmund, but he couldn't think of anything to say. "You didn't think anything at all," said Peter. "It's just spite. You've always liked being beastly to anyone smaller than yourself. We've seen that at school before now." "Do stop it," said Susan. "It won't make things any better having a row between you two, having a little fight between them. Let's go and find Lucy." It was not surprising that when they found Lucy a good deal later, everyone could see that she'd been crying. Nothing they could say to her made any difference. She stuck to her story, and she said, "I don't care what you think, and I don't care what you say. You can tell the professor, or you can write to Mother, or you can do anything you'd like. I know I've met a fawn in there. And I wish I'd stay there. And you're all beasts, beasts. It was an unpleasant evening. Lucy was miserable, and Edmund was beginning to feel that his plan wasn't working as well as he had expected. If you remember, Edmund was told by the Queen of Narnia to bring his brother and sisters to Narnia to her castle. So keep that in your head. The two older ones were really beginning to think that Lucy was out of her mind. They stood in the passage talking about it in whispers long after she had gone to bed. The result was the next morning they decided that they really would go and tell the whole thing to the professor. "He'll write to Father if he thinks there's really something wrong with Lou," said Peter. "It's getting beyond us." So they went and knocked at the study door, and the professor said, "Come in," and got up and found chairs for them and said he was quite at their disposal, so he was available to talk to them. Then he sat listening to them with the tips of his fingers pressed together and never interrupting, till they had finished the whole story. After that he said nothing for quite a long time. Then he cleared his throat and said the last thing that either of them expected. "How do you know," he asked, "that your sister's story is not true?" "Oh, but," began Susan, and then she stopped. Anyone could see from the old man's face that he was perfectly serious. Then Susan pulled herself together and said, "But Edmund said they had only been pretending." "Well, that's the point," said the professor, "which certainly deserves consideration, very careful consideration. For instance, if you will excuse me for asking the question, does your experience lead you to regard your brother or your sister as more reliable? I mean, is your brother more truthful or is your sister more truthful?" "Well, that's just the funny thing about it, sir," said Peter. "Up until now, I'd have said Lucy every time." "And what do you think, my dear?" said the professor, turning to Susan. "Well," said Susan, "in general, I'd say the same as Peter. But this couldn't be true about the wood and the fawn." So the professor asked, who tells the truth more often? Is it Lucy that tells the truth, or is it Edmund? And we know from experience in this book that Edmund happens to be a liar, right? "That is more than I know," said the professor. "And a charge of lying against someone whom you've always found truthful is a very serious thing. So we know that Lucy is usually very truthful. And the professor's telling them if you're calling Lucy a liar and she's never lied before, that's very serious." "Well, we were afraid it might not be lying," said Susan. "We thought maybe there was something wrong with Lucy." "Madness, you mean?" said the professor quite coolly. "Oh, you can make your minds easy about that one. One has only to look at her and talk to her. She's not mad. She's not crazy." "But then," said Susan, and stopped. She had never dreamed that a grown-up would talk like the professor, and didn't know what to think. "Logic," said the professor, half to himself. "Why don't they teach logic at these schools? There are only 3 possibilities. Okay, now listen carefully to these 3. Either your sister is telling lies, or she's mad, as in crazy, or she's telling the truth. So there's 3 things. Lucy's lying, Lucy's gone crazy, or Lucy's telling the truth. You know she doesn't tell lies, and it's obvious that she's not mad. For the moment then, and unless any further evidence turns up, we must assume that she is telling the truth." Susan looked at him very hard and was quite sure from the expression on his face that he was not making fun of them. "But how could it be true, sir?" said Peter. "Well, why do you say that?" asked the professor. "Well, for one thing," said Peter, "if it was real, why doesn't everyone find this country every time they go into the wardrobe? I mean, there's nothing there when we looked. Even Lucy didn't pretend there was." "Well, what does that have to do with it?" said the professor. "Well, sir, if things are real, they're real all the time." "Are they?" said the professor, and Peter did not quite know what to say. "But there was no time," said Susan. "Lucy had no time to have gone anywhere, even if there was such a place. She came running after us the very moment we went out of the room. It was less than a minute, and she pretended to have been away for hours." "Well, that's the very thing that makes her story so likely to be true," said the professor. "If there really is a door in this house that leads to some other world, and I should warn you that this house is very strange, and even I know very little about it. If, I say, she had gotten to another world, I should not be at all surprised to find that the other world had a separate time of its own, so that however long you stayed there, it would never take up any of our time." On the other hand, I don't think many girls her age would invent that idea for themselves. If she had been pretending, she would have hidden for a reasonable time before coming out and telling her story. Here's a picture of the professor and Peter and Susan. Okay, that's them talking to him. But do you really mean, sir, said Peter, that there could be other worlds all over the place just around the corner like that? Nothing is more probable, said the professor, taking off his spectacles and beginning to polish them, while he muttered to himself, I wonder, what do they teach in these schools? But what are we to do, said Susan. She felt that the conversation was beginning to get off the point. My dear young lady, said the professor suddenly, looking up with a very sharp expression at both of them, there's one plan which no one has yet suggested, and which is well worth trying. Well, what's that? Said Susan. We might try minding our own business, said he, and that was the end of the conversation. After this, things were a good deal better for Lucy. Peter saw it to it that Edmund stopped jeering at her, and neither she nor anyone else felt inclined to talk about the wardrobe at all. It had become a rather alarming subject, and so, for a time, it looked as if the adventures were coming to an end. But that was not to be. This house of the professor's, which even he knew so little about, was so old and famous that people from all over England used to come and ask permission to see over it. It was the sort of house that's mentioned in guidebooks and even in histories. And well, it might be for all manner of stories were told about it, some of them even stranger than the ones I'm telling you now. So picture, like, let's say Bordentown City. You know that we have some historical houses there. It would be like a tour group touring these old houses, or how you visited Clara Barton's schoolhouse. Remember, you went in 3rd grade. It would be like that. It would be like a tour of an old house or an old building. Okay. So people used to come from all over England to see this house. The professor lived in it. He didn't know much about it. I'm not sure how he got the house, okay? But again, people would come and visit and take tours through it. And when parties of sightseers arrived and asked to see the house, the professor always gave them permission, and Mrs. McGreedy, the housekeeper, showed them around, telling them about the pictures and the armor and the rare books in the library. Mrs. McGreedy was not fond of children and did not like to be interrupted when she was telling visitors all the things she knew. She had said to Susan and Peter almost on the first morning, along with a good many other instructions, and please remember, you're to keep out of the way whenever I'm taking a party over the house. Just as if any of us would want to waste half the morning trailing around with a crowd of strange grown-ups, said Edmund, and the other 3 thought the same. That was how the adventures began for the second time. A few mornings later, Peter and Edmund were looking at the suit of armor and wondering if they could take it to bits when the 2 girls rushed into the room and said, Look out! Here comes McGreedy and the whole gang with her! Sharp's the word, said Peter. If you remember what sharp's the word is, we have that at the bottom here, right? Let's get away quickly! And all 4 made off through the door at the far end of the room. But when they had got out into the green room, and beyond it, into the library, they suddenly heard voices ahead of them, and realized that Mrs. McGreedy must be bringing her party of sightseers up the back stairs. So picture this house. Your house, okay, or houses that you've been in, probably have one set of stairs, okay? Like you walk in and there's stairs to go up to the bedroom. Well, in a house like this, there could be 10 sets of stairs, hidden stairways inside walls. There could be a stairway in the kitchen that goes upstairs and a stairway in the hallway. So there are lots of different ways to get to different points in the house. And after that, whether it was that they lost their heads, or that Mrs. McGreedy was trying to catch them, or that some magic in the house had come to life and was chasing them into Narnia, they seemed to find themselves being followed everywhere. So no matter where they went, they heard these voices and Mrs. McGreedy coming. They seemed to find themselves being followed everywhere, until at last Susan said, Oh, bother those trippers! Here, let's get into the wardrobe room till they've passed. No one will follow us in there. But the moment they were inside, they heard voices in the passage, and then someone fumbling at the door, and then they saw the handle turning quickly. "Quick," said Peter, "there's nowhere else," and flung open the wardrobe. Now, the reason they're running is because Mrs. McGreedy told them to stay out of the way, and they didn't want to get in trouble and make it seem like they were, being annoying to the tourists. Okay, so they were really, really, really trying to just not get in trouble. "Quick," said Peter, "there's nowhere else," and flung open the wardrobe. All four of them bundled inside and sat there, panting in the dark. Peter held the door closed, but did not shut it, for of course he remembered, as every sensible person does, that you should never shut yourself up in a wardrobe. That's the end of chapter 5. Okay? And I hope that you're liking it so far. Just remember that there's going to be a lot of excitement happening. Make sure when I'm reading that you're really listening, and if you don't understand something, you can just go back in my video, okay, and listen to it again, or you can ask me. Every 3 chapters there will be a little quiz, just like you did last week. So we'll have a quiz probably at the end of the week on chapters 5. What did I do? Did I do chapters 1 to 4, maybe 5 to 8? So it might be end of this week or early next week, okay? All right. Bye.